Welcome to the supplementary video for Chapter 13, Technological Processes of Organizational Communication. And as I'm sure you know by now, always a good idea to start by reviewing this list of things you need to understand from the chapter. It's pretty obvious that technology is a huge part of modern organizational life, across every industry and sector. But it's also important to appreciate just how much things have changed in such a short amount of time. It wasn't that long ago that most things in most organizations were paper-based, at least in terms of the day-to-day activities of getting things done. I remember seeing pictures of my dad's office at work. He was an engineer for the Forest Service. He didn't even have a computer on his desk until the very end of his career. And I remember thinking, what did you even do all day at work if you didn't have a computer? I don't really even have a frame of reference for what professional work could be like without computers. But in some regards, I'm a bit of a dinosaur too. I didn't even send my first email to the end of my freshman year of college. And I'm not that old. And even then, email was an occasional activity done in the computer labs on campus. I didn't even do email during summer breaks until I got back on campus. And I didn't get a cell phone until my late 20s, after I had been married for a few years. Of course, now virtually everything is electronic, and portable technology dominates most aspects of our professional and personal lives. Now, our purpose in this chapter isn't just to marvel at all the new technologies or to be nostalgic for the good old days. Instead, our goal is to develop a framework for thinking about technology as it relates to organizational communication, and our chapter reviews several important concepts for us to consider. First, the most relevant aspect of technology for our study of organizational communication involves information communication technology, or ICT for short. So much technology of modern organizational life is about communicating information to other people inside and outside of the organization. That's obvious enough, but the important thing for any organization is that ICT devices are constantly changing, and organizational information has to be accessible to many people on many different devices. One of the big issues today is website optimization for smartphones and tablets, which are the primary devices many people use to access organizational information, either as customers surfing your website or members of the organization accessing the company intranet. Another big issue is basic compatibility. People have different operating systems and different programs and different devices, and some programs don't run on other operating systems or devices. And so if you don't have everybody all synced up in your organization, there's going to be problems. So compatibility is another big issue for information communication technologies. We also need to consider whether ICTs allow for synchronous or asynchronous communication. Synchronous communication involves real-time interaction, being synced up, like when you have a video call on FaceTime or Skype with a friend. There are also lots of online meeting tools that enable organizational members to communicate synchronously, even if they aren't in the same place. I do this all the time, using programs like Zoom or GoToMeeting to have a live video conference with people all over the world. Right now, I've got a graduate student doing research in the Philippines, and we meet online all the time with another professor involved in our project to discuss various developments in our research. I'm also working with a computer programmer in California to help create a new online simulation for one of the classes I teach. We've never met in person, but we have great meetings online using synchronous ICT meeting tools. On the other hand, asynchronous communication, or non-synchronous communication, does not take place in real time, like these videos for our online class. They were created a few weeks ago, and you're free to watch them whenever or wherever you want. We lose the advantage of real-time interaction, but we also gain the flexibility of accessing information whenever and wherever is convenient. So for various organizational initiatives and activities, you need to figure out whether synchronous or asynchronous communication will be most effective for what you're trying to accomplish. Similarly, you have to consider the value of anonymity with ICTs. Ensuring anonymity can help you gain valuable information you might not get if people were known. But it might also mean people are much less inhibited and communicate all sorts of garbage. Anonymous surveys, for example, can help organizations learn many valuable things from employees. Conversely, we've all seen the mess that can result from anonymous comments on websites. So we also need to consider the anonymity or not of information communication technologies. A few other things to consider. One, the concept of media richness. Face-to-face communication is probably the richest communication medium because of all the verbal and nonverbal cues that are present, and even the physical presence of another body influences the interaction. In contrast, a quick handwritten note is a pretty thin or lean communication medium because it lacks many important aspects of communication beyond the mere content of the message. Scholars argue that communication media richness should be considered in relation to the ambiguity of the task at hand, or task ambiguity. More ambiguous tasks should utilize richer communication media. This chart from your textbook visually represents this idea. That's why if I need to discuss grades with a student, for example, I'd rather do that in person during office hours, because that could be a difficult conversation. But if I just need to change the date of an assignment, I can do that via email, because that's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot of ambiguity in that task. Researchers also developed the dual capacity model that complicates the idea of media richness, proposing that every organizational communication medium has both data carrying capacity, the basic message, and symbol carrying capacity, additional meaning people might have for an individual communication medium itself. So some people might appreciate a quick text message, while others are offended by the lack of personal touch that texting gives. So even if the task is relatively unambiguous and a low richness communication medium seems appropriate, for some people it still might be nice or appropriate to increase the communication richness of the interaction. Like if you have a straightforward yet potentially controversial message for your boss, probably best to communicate that message in person, even though the ambiguity of the task might seem to suggest a lower richness communication medium. With this in mind, make sure you review the section in this chapter that examines the social factors of information communication technologies. Finally, we need to consider the phenomenon of virtual work or telework. As a college student, you are likely to work in a professional job when you graduate, with the opportunity or even requirement to work remotely, that is, not in the office. I'm working from home right now. And I often work from home a few times a month throughout the semester when I don't have any meetings on campus, I'm not teaching a class that day, and I've got a lot of work I can do just on my computer in my home office. There are a lot of advantages of virtual work or telework, such as increased flexibility and productivity. It's certainly nice to mow the lawn or walk the dog during a break at work, and the time I save on commuting lets me get a little more work done during the day. But there are some complications too. Our textbook chapter explains 3 paradoxes of telework and virtual organizing. Increased flexibility, but also increased structure. Greater individuality, but also more teamwork. And more responsibility, yet less control. These will play out differently for every person and every organization, but they are the kinds of things we need to think critically about as we incorporate more information communication technologies into our workplaces, and as we consider the kinds of professions we want to pursue and the kinds of organizations we want to work for. As we wrap up, be sure to review this chart that looks at how communication technology would be considered across all the approaches to organizational communication we've been learning about in our class. And some good questions here to inform your discussion board participation this week. And that's it for our supplementary chapter videos. I hope you've enjoyed our tour through the textbook and developed a thorough understanding of the key approaches and processes of organizational communication.